They were last seen just after evening prayers. On October 12, 1974, 4 nuns vanished without a trace from St. Agnes Church, a stone-walled parish nestled at the edge of a forgotten rural town in northern Malawi. The storm that night was unusually fierce. Lightning tore through the sky like judgment, and the church bell rang once, though no one was near the ropes. The missing were Sisters Miriam, Catherine, Eliza, and Therese. Each had lived within the church walls for at least 6 years. They were known to the local villagers as quiet women, devout, dutiful, unremarkable. By morning, their beds were untouched. Their breakfast bowls remained neatly stacked by the kitchen sink. The only sign that something was wrong came from the cellar door sealed shut, despite having no internal lock. It was the parish janitor who noticed first. He was there before sunrise, preparing for the Sunday service, when he found the front pews soaked not with rain, but with a thin red residue. The altar cloth was missing, and though the doors were bolted from inside, the 4 women were nowhere in sight. Father Joseph Osei, the presiding priest at the time, called no police. Instead, he summoned Bishop Atimba from the diocese, and a small group of men arrived late in the afternoon. They moved quickly. The cellar was opened. The area was swept. No one spoke as they worked, and by evening the door was sealed again, this time with nails. The official explanation came 2 days later. "The sisters have been called to serve elsewhere," said the statement from the diocese. "They have left of their own will and in peace. No further inquiry is necessary." But there were no goodbyes, no bags taken, no letters written. Their personal effects remained neatly in their rooms, untouched for years afterward. Whispers began to grow. Some villagers recalled the bells ringing 3 times after midnight. Others said they saw candlelight flicker from beneath the church floor. One man, a hunter, walking home through the storm, claimed he heard chanting not in Chichewa or Latin, but in something far older. He was drunk, they said. A known liar. Yet his wife would later swear he woke screaming for weeks afterward, unable to sleep without the lights on. And still the church kept going. Services resumed. The cellar remained sealed. Father Joseph never spoke of the matter again, and in 1976 he was reassigned to a distant province and never returned. Decades later, the names of the 4 women have largely vanished from church records. Their birth certificates remain. Their assignment logs stop in 1974, but no death certificates were ever filed, and in every archived roster since, there is a 4-week blank space in October. An altar boy who served at St. Agnes that year, a man now in his 60s, once agreed to be interviewed. He requested anonymity. His voice shook as he spoke. "They told us they went to another convent, but their rosaries were still in the drawer. One still had blood on it. I touched it. It was sticky." The church building itself was partially demolished in 1998 after a fire in the East Wing. The cellar remained sealed through it all. No renovation team was ever granted access. No official photos exist of the interior. Only a few faded floor plans remain, each showing a single staircase descending beneath the altar, leading to what's marked only as storage. Yet stories persist. Local children say prayers don't echo near the ruins anymore. Tourists who camp nearby complain of humming long, low, and rhythmic. And one missionary visiting the area in 2012 claimed she heard weeping beneath her feet during a candlelit vigil. The church denies all of it. They say no such women ever disappeared, that there was never any sealed door, that no names were erased, that no hymns were sung backward, that no basement ever existed beneath the altar. But in a quiet village far from the city, beneath the ruins of a forgotten church, something remains. And what really happened on that October night was much worse than anyone imagined. They arrived in silence. In January of 1968, 6 years before the disappearances, St. Agnes Church was reopened under the authority of the regional diocese. It had been dormant since the death of its former priest, Father Munthali, whose passing was never publicly explained. The building, left to decay for nearly a decade, was cleaned, repainted, and partially rebuilt. With its return came the arrival of new caretakers among them, the 4 women who would later vanish. They were not young. Sister Miriam was nearing 50. Sister Catherine, 43. Eliza and Therese were younger, but not by much. Each had served in separate convents across southern Africa before being reassigned here. Their official role was unclear. Clerical support, said one letter. Interior caretakers, claimed another. They wore habits even in the sun. None of them taught. None of them ventured into the village for supplies. Instead, deliveries were made once a month by a single driver from the diocese. No one remembers speaking more than a few words to any of them. They weren't cruel, said a woman named Ruth who attended Mass as a teenager during that time. They just didn't look like they slept. Their eyes were always red, like they'd been crying or reading. The town accepted them because it was easier than questioning the church. Father Joseph Osei had been newly ordained at the time, soft-spoken, pale, with a slow way of blinking that unsettled children. He rarely preached sermons longer than 6 minutes, and often spoke more Latin than Chichewa. He kept his door closed during the day, and was often seen walking the church perimeter after midnight, holding a small brass lantern. "Spiritual cleansing," he once told a neighbor. Behind closed doors, rumors began. Not loud ones, just whispers behind cloth stalls and between cracked open windows. Some said the sisters prayed at odd hours. Others claimed to hear heavy dragging sounds below the altar-like furniture being scraped, though no furniture was ever stored down there. One young boy, whose mother worked as a laundress for the parish, remembered seeing a man in black robes leave the cellar one evening. He never returned. When asked, the boy described the man as not a priest, but something like one. When pressed, he added, he didn't have eyes, just holes. The church denied his account, of course, said it was fever or nightmares. That's what they always said. But there were other moments, small ones, almost forgettable. A volunteer groundskeeper quit suddenly after claiming he found deep claw marks along the inner stone of the choir wall. The church painted over it. A visiting nun from another district fell ill after sleeping one night in the guest chamber near the east wing. She later wrote in her diary that her dreams were filled with children weeping and teeth grinding against wood. And then there was the bell. It rang alone, sometimes twice, sometimes 5 times, always in the dead of night, and always without a rope puller present. The mechanism had been checked. Nothing was wrong, and yet it rang, sharp, metallic, like a warning that no one could read. They were rebuilding something, said Elias Banda, a carpenter hired briefly in 1971 to replace ceiling beams. Something old, not new. The priest had these pages, not blueprints, drawings, ancient-looking things. He wouldn't let us touch them, said they were sacred. Elias left the job early. He claimed the cellar made his tools rust, even the new ones. By the summer of 1973, most villagers simply stopped asking questions. The nuns no longer visited the market. The priest's sermons grew shorter. A cold smell lingered near the altar, metallic and dry, like dust soaked in vinegar. And twice during evening service, a low humming sound echoed through the pews. At first, people thought it was the wind, but the windows were shut. Then came the final note. In early October, just days before the 4 women vanished, a visiting choir performed a hymn rarely sung outside Rome. Halfway through the melody, Sister Eliza dropped her book, stood up slowly, and began whispering in a language no one recognized. It wasn't Latin. It wasn't any known dialect. And it sounded, according to one witness, like pleading. When she was gently led away by the others, her eyes were wide. Her mouth remained open. She did not return for the rest of the Mass. It was the first and last time anyone saw her behave that way. And 10 days later, they were all gone. The basement was never part of the official plans. Original blueprints of St. Agnes Church, drawn in 1902 and preserved in brittle folders at the district office, show a modest foundation beneath the sanctuary, a crawl space for pipes, barely waist deep, with no stairway leading into it. Yet every witness who entered the church after its 1968 reopening remembered the stairs. They led down behind the altar, narrow and uneven, vanishing into a half-lit passage of stone and silence. The descent was sharp 9 steps, then a sudden drop ending in a heavy wooden door reinforced with black iron. That door, villagers say, was never opened during the day, and when it did open, the sound was like dragging chain on wet stone. "I went down once," said Elias Banda, the carpenter who had refused to finish his work. "Just to the landing. The temperature dropped like a well. My glasses fogged. I felt like I wasn't supposed to breathe there. Most assumed it was storage, a pantry perhaps, some space for archives or ceremonial robes. But no records list an inventory. No priest ever spoke of it publicly. And when asked, the sisters only said, 'It is not for the living.' Inside, for those few who claimed to have seen it, the design was wrong. A rectangular room carved from black stone, large enough for a congregation. No windows, No furniture. Just walls lined with iron hooks and shallow alcoves, as if something had once been stored, then removed. The ceiling bore faded markings in soot, crosses turned sideways, circles nested in threes, and a phrase carved directly above the door, repeated on every wall. Domine corripe eas in lumine tuum. Lord, correct them in your light. One missionary visiting from Zimbabwe in 1972 was granted a rare walkthrough. She later wrote in a private letter that the room had a memory of screaming and that her ears ached when she prayed inside it. Her letter was never published. She left the order shortly after and disappeared from all church records. More unsettling were the changes above ground. Over time, the altar shifted. Just slightly. It tilted eastward, as though the floor beneath it had warped. A faint hum could be heard during morning service. At first thought to be insects, but persistent even through winter. One parishioner claimed the floor vibrated when certain hymns were sung. Another said the shadow of the crucifix on the far wall sometimes bent at odd angles, even when the sun was still. The air in the nave began to sour. Candles refused to stay lit near the back pews. Flowers wilted faster in the sacristy. A metal offering bowl left overnight developed rust despite being brand new. But the worst were the voices. Children heard them first. During evening visits, several altar boys reported hearing whispers just below the floorboards. Female voices, soft and pleading. Once, a boy began weeping uncontrollably during confession. He said Sister Miriam had called his name. But Sister Miriam had not been seen outside the church in weeks. The priest scolded him, said demons mimic the innocent, that he should not listen. In 1973, a letter was sent to the diocese requesting spiritual reinforcements. It was written by Father Joseph himself. His wording was careful but unmistakable. The house is not right. It echoes before sound. The women are not sleeping. One of them keeps her face turned to the wall. And sometimes when I descend into the lower room, I forget why I came. There was no reply, or if there was, it was never documented. And then just before the disappearances, workmen arrived with concrete. They poured fresh slabs around the base of the altar, sealed cracks with pitch and ash, and boarded the stairwell with thick planks. They worked quickly, without permits, and were gone within 2 days. Villagers who passed by at night saw candlelight flicker from beneath the floor, and then the door was nailed shut. I never meant to go down there. It was October 9th, 1974, 3 days before they vanished. I was 18 then, working as a delivery boy for my uncle's supply service. We brought dry goods to the church once a month. Salt, rice, candles, bandages. Nothing unusual. But that morning something was off. When I arrived, the front door was open. No one met me, no voices, just the cold. Not the kind of cold you feel in the air. It was inside my bones, like the church was holding its breath. I called out. No reply. I waited 5 minutes, then walked in. The pews were empty. Sunlight barely reached the altar. The air smelled like vinegar and old wood. I left the box on the front step of the kitchen and turned to go, but something stopped me. I heard humming, faint, low, like a woman's voice echoing through stone. It was coming from beneath the altar. Curiosity is a curse. I walked toward the sanctuary. The stairs behind the altar were no longer boarded, just bare wood leading down. My feet moved before my mind could stop them. 1 step, then another. 9 steps. Then darkness. The door at the bottom was cracked open. Inside there were no windows, no lights. Only candles in iron holders along the walls, already burning. The room was massive, hollowed stone, almost circular. The smell hit me first. Iron, like blood left in the sun. And something sweeter. Rotted flowers, old incense, mold. There were marks on the walls, scratches, symbols. Burned areas like someone had tried to erase something with fire. And on the floor salt circles, dark stains, scraps of linen folded into strange shapes. In the center stood Sister Catherine. Her back was to me. Her veil was missing. Her hair hung in clumps, matted like seaweed. She was humming gently, her arms out like a cross. She swayed. Her bare feet stood in a bowl of red water. I didn't speak. I couldn't. She turned slowly. Her eyes were open, but wrong milky, like wax. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came. Just the humming. And then, without blinking, she pointed to the wall behind me.
I turned.
There were 4 hooks, only 3 were empty. On the 4th hung a veil. I don't remember leaving. I don't remember running. I remember blinking and suddenly standing outside, the box of supplies still at my feet. My legs trembled. My vision swam. I didn't tell anyone. Not that day, not until after. 3 days later, they were gone. When I finally tried to speak, my uncle hit me, called me a liar, said I was making up ghosts, said I'd insulted the church. But I wasn't mad. It wasn't madness. It was method. Something was happening in that room. Something old, cold, precise. I left the village 2 months later. Couldn't stay. Couldn't walk past that steeple. I still dream about it, those hooks, that bowl, the way the candlelight didn't flicker, as if the air itself was afraid to move. Years later, I tried to file a report with the regional office. They laughed. One man offered to pray for me. Another said I must have seen a rehearsal for a passion play. They'd never heard of Sister Catherine, he claimed. But I remember her humming. I remember the red bowl. And I remember her mouth moving without sound, like something was speaking through her, but hadn't quite learned how. Her name was Grace. She was sent to St. Agnes in April of 1974, just 6 months before the disappearances. She was not a nun, not a postulant, not even particularly religious. She was 19, stubborn, bright, the daughter of a teacher and a weaver. Her crime, as whispered behind closed doors, was defiance. She had refused a marriage arranged by her uncle, refused to give up the child she bore from a teacher who vanished once rumors began. She had read books considered unsuitable for women her age, European novels, banned pamphlets, and once a copy of De Humani Corporis Fabrica translated into Chichewa. She thinks too much, her aunt said. She needs correction. So they sent her to the church. It was called a retreat, a place for reflection and moral repair. She would return, they said, more grateful, more gentle, more feminine. She did not resist. She arrived with her child's name whispered in her mouth and fire quietly burning behind her eyes. Her first week was silence. No clocks, no mirrors, no calendar. Time blurred. Meals came irregularly. Lights stayed dim. She was not allowed to write or speak unless spoken to. No reading, no paper, no pens. The other women never made eye contact. They moved like sleepwalkers, cleaning, cooking, praying in low hums. At night, Grace heard them murmur in their rooms. Not words, just murmurs. Some like prayers, some like begging. On the third night, her door was left unlocked. She walked down the hall barefoot, breath frozen in her throat. As she passed a chapel window, she saw the moonlight slant against the far wall and noticed a red ribbon nailed to the wood, stretched flat and pinned like a warning. She didn't ask about it. She didn't ask about anything. She learned early that questions were punished. She was denied food for a day after asking where the childbearing women slept. Ice water poured over her when she refused to kneel for prayer. Once, a sister placed her in a chamber beneath the sacristy for 12 hours. No light, no sound, just stone and a single candle she wasn't allowed to light. They told her she was sinful, that she was unclean, that her womb carried defiance and her mind was too loud to be pure. Grace did not argue, but she watched. She learned that Sister Catherine always turned the same corner at 9:15, that the candle carts were pushed to the rear at sundown, that the floorboards in the southern hallway creaked in a perfect rhythm 3, then pause, then 1. She collected berries from the inner garden. She crushed them into pulp and stored them in a hidden cloth under her bed. She used them to mark the walls behind the wardrobe's shaky letters that only she could read in the dark. She wasn't trying to escape. She was writing it down. She memorized symbols carved into the bottom of her drinking cup. She stole pages from old hymnals during chapel cleaning and hid them beneath her mattress. When she caught glimpses of the basement door, she counted the candles, counted the steps, counted the women who went in and didn't come out the same. One evening during candle duties, she saw Sister Eliza staring at her own reflection in the window, eyes wide, lips unmoving. Eliza turned and whispered, "I dreamed I was on a hook, and I couldn't tell if I was dead or just empty." Grace didn't sleep that night. She waited, observed, endured. She was the only one who still cried, and they hated her for it. On her 35th day, the weather shifted. A storm gathered. Clouds rolled in thick and low. The church grew darker, quieter. Doors creaked. The women hummed slower. The air turned to smoke and rust. That night, a bell rang once, then again, then stopped. and the stairwell beneath the altar was left open. They returned on paper, not in person. 3 weeks after the official disappearance, a notice was quietly issued by the diocese. All 4 sisters have been relocated to private service in Blantyre. Their vocations continue. No press release, no parish announcement, just a single letter posted on the church bulletin board for less than a day. But some claim they saw one of them. Sister Eliza, a woman matching her description, was spotted in a distant village near the Mozambican border, walking barefoot along a dusty road. Her face was pale, wrapped in a loose scarf, eyes hidden behind black glasses. A farmer offered her water. She did not speak. When asked where she was headed, she pointed up the road and kept walking. A week later, a child named Moses swore that Sister Miriam came into his home during a storm. She didn't knock. She just stood in the kitchen, soaking wet, and stared at the family's crucifix for several minutes before quietly leaving. His mother said it was a dream. Moses said the floor was still wet the next morning. And then nothing. Until the letters. In early 1975, families of the disappeared received handwritten notes, all identical in tone, all signed with the sisters' names. Each one said, "I am safe. I have found peace. Do not worry for me. God has called me to a quiet place." But the handwriting was not theirs. Therese's sister kept hers, showed it to a handwriting expert 2 years later. The analysis came back uncertain but odd. The pressure was wrong, the loops too mechanical. Like someone imitating calm, the expert said. Even stranger were the returns. In the months that followed, 3 other women from the parish, young, troubled, unmarried, were sent away to retreats organized by the church. When they came back, they were quiet, perfect, obedient. Too obedient. Maria Bonda, once headstrong and lively, came back without her laughter. She no longer remembered her favorite song. She no longer fought with her brother. She no longer cried. When asked how her retreat was, she only said, "I am clean now." Another girl, Talitha, returned with a red ribbon in her hair. She wore it every day, even though she had never liked ribbons before. Her mother tried to remove it once. Talitha screamed not words, just a sharp sound like a kettle about to boil. After that, it was never touched again. They called it healing. The church labeled them transformed. Doctors said their aggression was gone. That prayer had worked. That discipline had succeeded where therapy failed. But their eyes were hollow. Their rooms stayed neat. Their voices grew soft and slow. And one by one, they stopped attending Mass altogether. It was as if the place that fixed them had also unstitched something vital. At night, some of them whimpered in their sleep. One girl, Bernadette, began wetting the bed again. She woke screaming once, claiming her hands weren't hers anymore. She said they moved when she didn't ask them to. Their families tried to speak up, but the church offered answers too polished, too firm. Adjustment is normal. Some girls need more quiet than others. They're finding God in their silence. And yet something was missing. One mother, after visiting her daughter post-retreat, brought home a doll the girl no longer recognized. It had been her favorite, a gift from her late father. Now she stared at it as if it were an unfamiliar object. She smiled at it, her mother said, but not like someone remembering, like someone pretending they were supposed to remember. Worse were the physical signs. Some had scalp scars hidden beneath their veils. One developed extreme sensitivity to sound covering her ears whenever church bells rang. Another was found in the garden one night, standing barefoot in a pool of candle wax, eyes closed, humming. No one knew what they'd seen. But whatever was done to them had not erased the pain. It had only buried it, quiet and deep. And when they smiled, it wasn't joy. It was survival. The storm broke just after midnight. Rain fell in sheets, slamming against the stained glass windows until the painted saints blurred like tears. Thunder cracked, close, loud enough to rattle the wood beams above the altar. Grace waited in her bed, eyes open, heartbeat in her throat. She had seen the signs. Earlier that day, Sister Therese had whispered, "Tonight is the choosing." A smile too wide stretched across her face, her hands shaking as she folded a veil that didn't belong to her. Grace kept her silence, but she had already made up her mind. When the hallway went still and the humming stopped, Grace slipped barefoot from her room. The candles had been doused. Only moonlight through clouded windows lit her path. Her hands trembled as she passed the prayer room, then the sacristy, then the steps to the altar. The stairwell gaped open like a wound. She descended, 9 steps, and then the room. Below, the chamber glowed faintly, 4 tall candles placed at the corners of a square. At the center lay a figure on a stone table, face hidden under a veil. Sister Miriam stood beside it, murmuring in a foreign tongue. Beside her, Father Joseph, dressed in ceremonial black, held a book bound in animal skin. Symbols scrawled the pages circles within circles, a face with too many eyes. Behind them, jars, dozens of them, lined neatly on the floor, filled with cloudy liquids. Something floated inside, small things, preserved things. Tucked beside the jars were folded letters, locks of hair, photographs of women Grace recognized, some from the retreat, others she had only seen once. One jar had a red ribbon tied around its neck. She stepped back, her foot catching a metal bowl. It clanged. The room froze. Father Joseph looked up. Grace ran. She turned before the cries began, before the shadows moved. She heard nothing, only the blood rushing in her ears. Up the stairs, through the hall, out the side door, and into the storm. Rain soaked her within seconds. She didn't stop. She ran barefoot through mud and field, breath tearing from her chest, heart crashing like thunder in her ribcage. Behind her, she imagined doors opening, bells ringing, veils unraveling. She reached the village before dawn. She pounded on the parish house of the elder, shouting words that barely made sense. Basement, rituals, women being cut, names in jars. She collapsed at his feet, sobbing. And finally someone listened. The elder called the district office. A truck was sent. Grace handed over a torn hymnal page with symbols drawn in berry ink. She gave them a map, names, directions, what to expect, what to avoid. They returned to the church that evening. What they found silenced the room. The basement was open, candles still burned. Jars lined the walls. Notes, letters, veils, each marked with a name. Inside a locked cabinet were surgical tools, scalpels, bone saws, notebooks filled with anatomical sketches of women's brains. No one spoke. There were no signs of struggle, no blood trails, no bodies. But the evidence was overwhelming. The authorities seized it all. And yet, the sisters were gone. Father Joseph was gone. All church records from the past year were missing. Baptism logs, retreat forms, visitor entries, all pages torn or burned. The delivery boy who once entered the basement had vanished days earlier. His family found his shoes at the edge of the river. In the weeks that followed, an internal investigation was launched. The church gave no public statement. The basement was sealed again. The building was left to decay. One investigator, in a confidential report later leaked, wrote, "They didn't want power. They wanted obedience, not healing erasure. They took the knowledge. They left the blood." Grace disappeared shortly after the investigation concluded. Some say she changed her name, moved to South Africa. Others claim she joined a convent under false papers. No one ever saw her again. But her notes, those survived. And the jars? They were buried, but never cataloged. Years passed. The world moved on. St. Agnes Church stood empty for nearly a decade. Its doors chained shut, its windows blackened by mildew and time. No official records acknowledged what was found beneath it. The district made no press statements. The church denied comment. The photographs from the basement were sealed in diocesan archives marked "Do Not Duplicate." The land was sold quietly to a private trust. In 1998, a fire destroyed the east wing of the structure. No investigation followed. Locals said lightning struck the steeple. Others claimed a gas leak, but no fire report was ever filed. By the early 2000s, the only physical evidence left was stone-cracked, scorched, and overgrown. But something still lingered. Children said prayers wouldn't echo near the ruins. Hikers who passed the site claimed their watches stopped ticking for minutes at a time. One journalist, researching the case in 2007, reported hearing weeping beneath his feet while standing on the cracked chapel tiles. He dismissed it as water in the pipes, but there were no pipes left. The story of the 4 nuns, Miriam, Catherine, Eliza, and Therese, never made the papers. No death certificates were issued. Their families stopped asking questions, some out of fear, others because they were told not to ask. One mother's sister, Eliza, attempted to sue the diocese in 1981. The case was dismissed. No witnesses were willing to testify. She died 2 years later. Her last words, according to the nurse, were, "She came back, but it wasn't her." Grace's name never appeared in any official report. Her testimony was labeled unstable. She was last seen boarding a northbound train under a false surname. Her trail ends at a convent in Lesotho, but even that is uncertain. What is known is that no one ever rebuilt on the land. The church ruins remain untouched. Developers refuse. Surveys were inconsistent. One company reported that soil samples taken from beneath the altar showed anomalous magnetic patterns. A second company declined to return after a foreman reported a persistent humming sound coming from underground. Local clergy claim it's superstition, that no such women disappeared, that no such ritual chamber existed, that the photographs were doctored, that no preserved jars were ever buried in the forest by silent men in clerical robes. But buried they were. In 1999, a small shrine appeared in the nearby woods. No one claimed responsibility. It stood 4 feet tall, made of red stone, with a single object embedded in the center, a rusted hook. No inscription, no flowers, just a hook. Then one spring the humming stopped. Not permanently, just long enough to notice its absence. For 3 weeks, the wind didn't pass through the ruins. No rustle in the weeds, no echo beneath the cracked tiles. Then as suddenly as it left, the sound returned, softer, deeper, slower, as if whatever was beneath had gone quiet only to listen. In 2011, a theology student from Kenya reopened research on the case. She spent 3 months tracing archived letters, testimonies, and floor plans. Her findings were never published. She was found dead in her dormitory, a single page clutched in her hand, a child's drawing of 4 veiled women standing around a red bowl. She had no known children in her family. And what of the knowledge taken? The anatomical journals disappeared. Not a single one was recovered. But fragments of the handwriting match research cited without attribution in obscure psychology journals published in the mid-80s. Techniques for memory suppression, experiments in emotional erasure, papers that speak of compliance restructuring without acknowledging their source. One researcher, long retired, admitted off-record that his work began with unverified church records, passed to him by a former priest. He could not or would not remember which diocese. What remains are whispers, a cracked ribbon found near the ruins, a prayer book buried beside a pine tree, a veil dug up from beneath the ashes, and 4 names occasionally scratched into school desks and chapel benches in the nearby village. Miriam, Catherine, Eliza, Therese. If you ask the elders, they will shake their heads. If you ask the children, they will not speak at all. And if you walk near the old site at night, beneath the moon and the rotting steeple, you may hear the bell. It doesn't ring anymore, not out loud. But something echoes quiet, rhythmic, distant, and no one knows why. No one rebuilt on that land. No flowers grow near the altar, but the earth still remembers.